But welcome everyone. My name is Nick Redman. I'm a alum. I'm a class of 2012. More importantly for this session, I am the Associate Director of Alumni Relations here at the college, just helping out our colleagues in parent relations for the morning. I hope you're all having a good morning. I am just here to say hello. A couple of housekeeping tips. I know there will be time for questions. Everyone is muted to start the process. Um, but if you are preparing to ask a question, you have the ability to unmute your audio and video yourself. So if you are going to ask a question, just do that before you ask the question. The chat will be open if you have any questions for me, particularly like general Zoom questions. I'm happy to try to answer those in the chat if you're having an issue, maybe unmuting or something like that. But without further ado, I want to introduce Buzz Myers. Buzz Myers is a professor in the religion department. He's held various titles over the years, including chair of the department for 13 years. And I guess importantly for this crowd, something I did not know, but I learned recently that Buzz is also a past parent of a 2009 grad. So I know we have some parents in this crowd, so Buzz can relate to that. But without further ado, Buzz, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Nick. I appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. It's great to see all of you, and it's nice. I like doing Zoom because I actually get to see faces. Although most of you now have blocked off the faces, so I can't see. I can't see you, but I'm so used to teaching people in masks that it's nice to see a whole face here for a change. Uh, I am a parent, and I will explain that in just a little bit. And that's one of the reasons why I've done something like this for many years. I've taught this seminar for a long time. And Saturday morning, I know on parent weekend or fall family weekend, parents show up, particularly of first year students. They show up and they're ready to go. They roll out of bed and they're ready to go at 8 a.m. and they're just all excited and the like, and they find out that their son or daughter doesn't get out of bed until 11. So what I've done for the last few years is gather parents of my first year seminar students and do something with them, talk about the course or about college life or whatever they'd like to talk about for a time in the morning until students end up getting up and getting ready for the rest of the day. I will tell you something that is important if you are a first time parent, if you are the parent of a first year student. You need to know something about Fall Family Weekend, which I learned the hard way. We have parents that show up on Thursday of Fall Family Weekend, and they just want to spend as much time with their child as possible. And they end up being frustrated by that because ultimately, what I found out is that the one critical thing you need to do at Fall Family Weekend is take your child to dinner on Saturday night and make sure it's an early dinner because they're going to want to say goodnight to you at an early stage of the evening. So don't be offended by that, but they have other studying and things like that to do on Saturday evening. So your presence isn't needed at that time. But dinner, really good. Take them out, take them off campus, have a meal with them, and then have an early evening. And you go back and have fun together, but let your son or daughter get back to what they need to do on campus. So, with that in mind, I'm going to talk a little bit about the course, probably a lot about the course, but I do know that there are, as I look over the list of names, there are clearly people who do not have a child that's in this particular class. So, I'm going to talk about what we do in the class, but I'm going to raise the issue of death and how we don't really talk about death in our society. The genesis for this course comes from a faculty member who offered a course called Perspectives on Death and Dying for 25 years. He was in my department, and just before he retired, he asked me to make sure in his retirement that I would pick up the mantle and continue to offer a course on death. And so I actually took his course the last year he offered it, which was 1999. And then starting in 2000, I started offering this course as an upper level course. It was all seniors for the first couple of years. then I ended up getting, was very honored to be given a distinguished teaching fellowship position that required me to work with first year students and first year faculty members. And so I changed what was an upper level course into a first year seminar. And since that time, I've offered it as a first year seminar. But basically the reason why this course is so important, and one of the very first things we do in class to illustrate this, is that I have students bring to class a song or a poem or a joke or a movie or some other kind of artifact, and then have them talk about that particular artifact, an artifact that deals with death. I should have said that, an artifact that deals with death. And then tell me why, when death is such a common theme in everything we read and write and view, everything we listen to, all of it, death surrounds us in culture. And yet, death is the one thing we never talk about. Why is that? Why don't we have conversations about death? Why don't we have conversations about funerary preparations or about life after death? Or some, those are the topics that we don't talk about. And so this course is really intended not because I'm an expert in the field, but it's intended to get people to start talking about something that we don't talk about as a society. And this is a distinctively American problem. Other cultures of the world don't have nearly the difficulty talking about death that we have. But we simply do not talk about death. We're preoccupied with death in everything, as I say. All of the TV shows that we watch and the movies and the books that we read, all of them have death in them. And yet that's what we don't talk about. So why don't we? And how do we begin the conversation? And that's really what this is. This is the beginning of a lifelong conversation about death. And the point that I get criticized for every semester when we do our course evaluations is that I don't spend enough time on the meaning of life, which is a legitimate criticism. I don't deny that. But my whole point in the course is that you cannot appreciate the meaning of life without confronting the reality of death. We have a limited amount of time here. So what are we going to do? What are we going to do to make a meaningful life? And how do we decide that? Who helps us sort of put that together? And all of those are sort of issues that I want to get at. But first of all, we have to confront our own mortality. We don't have an unlimited amount of time. And that's what makes life so rich. We don't have an unlimited amount of time. The question is, what are we going to do with that limited amount? And when I did this with seniors, I thought, boy, seniors have had a lot of experience, probably more experience with death than others have. But I have really found over the years that our first year students actually have experienced a lot of death already. Primarily, it would be grandparents. In some cases, there are parents who have died. I've had many students who have had a parent die. I had a student a number of years ago whose boyfriend had been killed by a drunk driver in her junior year of high school. A student a few years ago had her best friend commit suicide 2 weeks before high school graduation. That happened in May of her senior year, and she was in my class on death and the meaning of life just a couple of months later in August of that year. She gave the eulogy, she gave a eulogy at his funeral. And as a result, she gave that in class to us. It was absolutely remarkable. So our first year students, in fact, have thought about death. Our first year students have had experience about, but they haven't always had the chance to talk about it. And that's what this course gets them to do. This is not a content-driven course. I teach courses, my own field is biblical studies, and I do teach courses on the New Testament and on the Hebrew Bible that are really content-oriented. But that's not what this course is. We read a lot of things and students do a lot of writing, but that's really not the purpose of the course. I'm not going to test you on, do you know the stages of grief and things like that. I want students to wrestle with the idea of mortality. And what does that mean to them? What does that say to their life at present? And how does that affect the relationships they have with others? And my hope is that this kind of conversation with your child is going to motivate you to have a conversation about that at home. So, for instance, do your children know what your funeral plans are? Is that something that's been a topic of conversation? If you were to fall over dead tomorrow, does someone know what you would want? Have you had that conversation? Well, my students have to figure that stuff out. And my hope is that they're going to take that kind of thinking back home and try and get people in their household to talk about those issues and to understand what some of the problems are and the difficulties. We end up making those kinds of decisions in a crisis moment just after someone has died. That's the worst possible time to make those decisions. And yet that's how probably 98% of people end up making the decision, is after the fact. It's much better to think about it before and get some kind of perspective on death, some kind of perspective on what's done at the time of death and the like, so that when it happens, that doesn't add to the greater anxiety and the greater grief that people suffer at the time of the loss of a loved one. So, all of this is to say that we don't solve these problems in the course. This is really the beginning. It's the beginning of a conversation. And I believe that this course is probably one of the most practical courses my students will take in their time at college. They'll come back to this over and over and over again in the course of their life. I'm just convinced of that. And in fact, I've had a number of students who have gotten in touch with me after, long after, who will say, someone has died in my family and I was the one that helped them with the grieving process, or I'm the one that went to the funeral home with them and helped them make decisions about what was going to be done. And I'm the one that talked to them and told them that this is the normal way of acting, that they shouldn't be, grief is all consuming, and if you feel listless and the like after you lose someone, that's normal. So my students in fact become knowledgeable about these topics and can help other family members in many different ways. um, I'll stop there and just see if there are any questions that people have before I talk about what I do or how I approach this with first year students. But does anyone have any kind of general question or comment? Okay, you're like my students. No one is chiming in here, so that.
I have a question. This
Okay,
is
okay.
Gina.
Hi, Gina.
Um, you may be about to talk about this, but I'd be curious to know some of the things you do read in the
Oh,
class.
okay, okay. I am going to do that. Yes, yes.
Okay, great.
Okay, okay. That's
Thanks.
perfect, perfect, perfect segue. So I'm going to do a PowerPoint, which is not my favorite thing to do. I just seem to be doing a lot of these days. But I want to show you some of the things that we're wrestling with this semester. And of course, this is really an unusual semester, as you already know. Uh, but I'll show you some of the things that we've done and how the course has had to be modified. I'll show you pictures of other semesters and things we've done in other years, but I will talk specifically as well about what we're doing now and give you an idea of what life is like on a college campus during a pandemic. This is an experience that not many people have, fortunately. So let me share my screen. I'm going to show you a number of slides here that have some pictures and have some content and the like. This is specifically for people who have a student maybe now on campus that's in the seminar. A number of you, from the names, I don't know you, so maybe you don't have anyone related to the class. You're just here out of interest. So just bear with me for a few minutes. This will help you at least understand what other students are going through and may give you some insight into what your own son or daughter is going through. Anyhow, the course is Death and the Meaning of Life, which you are well aware of. And as I've already indicated, I have two faces. I am a faculty member and have been a faculty member at Gettysburg College for almost my entire academic career. I taught for 2 years at Swarthmore College before coming to Gettysburg. but I've been at Gettysburg for the vast majority of my academic and professional career. But I'm also the father of a graduate, and my daughter graduated in 2009. Uh, your children always surprise you, and my daughter was no exception here. Not only did she attend the college that where I taught or where I teach, which surprised me, she took a course from me the first semester that she was on campus. That surprised me. She ended up majoring in my department, which really surprised me, and I was her academic advisor, which blew me away. So actually, I got to see my daughter in action. I even invited her to help me with this course, Death and the Meaning of Life, even though she did not take this course. I had her help me with it because I knew that if I wanted honest feedback, my daughter's the one that would give me honest feedback. She wouldn't sugarcoat anything. And boy, she sure didn't sugarcoat anything. I got some great feedback from her as a result. But this is a pictured graduation, and I'll point out, and I want to mention this as for all of you that are involved with the college, this is what a standard graduation would look like. We are standing, this is Penn Hall over on this side over here. So we're looking out from Penn Hall, the library's in the background over here. And all the graduates you can see are seated in the middle in front of the steps that lead up to Penn Hall. Now that's important. I'm going to come back to that in just a couple of minutes. So remember, this is where graduation takes place. She has just come off of a platform where she has received her diploma and she's walking across the walk, and faculty members are seated here. So I've jumped out of my seat and I've gone over to get a picture taken with Annabelle as she comes off the platform. And I'll explain why that's important in just a minute. Okay, here is the class of 2024. The only person who is not in the picture is Jamil, who is Zooming with us today. Because he missed the picture, I required him to show up. No, only kidding. But he's the only student not in the picture. And I don't know if he didn't know that we were going to take this picture or whatever, but this was after our initial convocation. There is a first year student convocation ceremony that we have every year. That would normally be where the parents would watch the students become officially new students of the college. We didn't do that this year. And that is a major event in the life of the college that was missed. But so to sort of get you to understand what this is about, I dressed up and I stood out like a sore thumb because I did dress up, but this is the way I would normally dress up for convocation. And you will see if you look carefully, you can see that there are pins that students have. They've pinned a new student pin on them to make them they are officially a new student at Gettysburg College. Now, the door that you see at the top, well, okay, I'm going to come back. I guess it's not the door. Anyway, this is a picture of the class. Okay, so let's go ahead and figure out where students live. Where do students live on campus? My students this year, and this changes from year to year, live in a place called Paul Hall. Paul Hall is, and here is the designation of Paul Hall. Paul Hall is a residence hall in the first year residence quad. It's in the west quad as opposed to the east quad. And there are Paul, Rice, and Stein are the three that are in a U shaped here. Okay. And my students are going to come out of this door to come over to the class because the class is held in Breidenbach. Now I took this picture when they were doing some painting, and so I've got a cherry picker here in the front that is normally not there. But this is the walk that students come down to go to class, and they can come in this door here because the class is on the ground floor. Actually, it's below ground, but it's on the first floor of the building. So do not have your son or daughter complain to you that the walk to class is too long. They can spit from their residence hall to Breidenbach. It is so short. And I've just show you on the map here. Here's a map of the campus pointing out where Paul Hall is. It's that building right there. And we meet in Breidenbach, which is that building there. So we have probably 150 feet between the two buildings. You can't be any closer to Paul Hall than in the basement of Breidenbach. Well, the basement of Breidenbach used to have a big, huge conference table in it, and we would all sit around a conference table, but that was pre-COVID. So now we have a socially distanced classroom. So they have taken out the desks, the table. They have now put in these chairs that move around, and everyone is marked. They've all measured all of these to make sure we are all in 6 feet apart. I don't know if you can see this up here, but this is looking from the front of the classroom to the back. And this used to be the language lab. So you can see that there are Chinese characters on the wall. They didn't repaint the room when they changed it into other regular classroom. But I'm supposed to stand behind this plexiglass glass. So not only does everyone have a mask, I'm supposed to stand behind a plexiglass glass. I don't do that too often, but I also have a mask, and I'm very far in front of where others are in front of the class. Okay, so that's what the classroom looks like. But what's it look like with students? Well, here is a classroom with students in it, and you can see that they are socially distanced. Because things are also online, because there's some that are in quarantine, there's some that are not feeling well, and they are encouraged not to come to class if they're not feeling well. This is not a full complement of students, but this gives you an idea of what a classroom looks like today in our socially distanced universe. Students are apart from one another. No one is on top of each other. No one is close by. Everyone is socially distanced. That at least is what happens in the classroom. Well, I mentioned before this convocation event, and we decided to have a socially distanced opening convocation. Instead of having the entire first year class for convocation, we had 12 of them. 12 different convocation ceremonies, and they were grouped according to first year seminars. So 3 first year seminars at a time at a convocation ceremony. So here are our students, socially distanced, listening to a student speaker here. And then we are going to have the president speaking over here. And the reason I point this picture out is because what happens to the students afterwards is important for you to understand. The students stood up and then walked up these iron stairs, the staircase here, and entered this door. You can just see this door here. And that is a symbol of them entering into the college. That is a symbol of them entering college. 4 years from now, they're going to come out of that door for graduation. So graduation the students will come streaming out of that door and then come down the stairs here and then sit in this infield area here. And then they will come up and get their diplomas by walking across the front in this direction from right to left. So here's a clue for you. When you come to graduation, sit on the left-hand side. You want to be able to see your student's face. If you sit on the right-hand side, you'll see their back when they get their diploma. You want to be on the other side and see their face when the president actually hands them their diploma. And remarkably enough, he hands them their actual diploma. We don't send it 6 months later. They get their actual diploma. So make sure they don't spill water on it or whatever. That's the real thing that they will get at graduation. But graduation will take place here, and they will walk from right to left. So if you're over on this side of the field, you'll see their faces. They come across, and the president hands them their diploma. When they go up on that and through that door there, what they're going to do is come out on the other side, which is the door that I showed you a moment ago. This is the group after they've come through the door. This is the door they exited during convocation, first year convocation. That's the door they'll enter for graduation, and they'll go right across the hall and then down the stairs out the other door. So this is the south side of Penn Hall. They will come out the north side of Penn Hall for graduation. And the other thing to point out is that the banner on the top of the cupola, which will say class of 2024, was was raised during orientation here when they first moved in and during these convocation ceremonies. It's then packed away for 4 years and it will come out on graduation weekend. So that's the only other time that banner will fly on the cupola, will be on graduation weekend. It's a wonderful tradition, and you didn't get a chance to see all of that. So what I did, since I'm a parent and I know exactly what you would have done, you would have taken a picture of your child. So I took, actually, I didn't, it was one of our students took pictures of all of our students in our first year seminar, and I followed suit how they wanted to pose. So we have some. So Jessica wanted thumbs up. Lucas wanted thumbs up too, so I did that. And then we've got, who is next? Jenna, another thumbs up. I guess we got stuck on thumbs up. And then there's Annie. We have Emily, thumbs up again. There's Jill, also thumbs up. I guess everyone. Okay, I think we changed here. We're coming up on some change. There's Olivia, sassy little pose there. Then we've got Kristen, who is going, sorry, I got ahead of myself there. So we've got Kristen, Kristen over here. You can see Kristen's, can you see Kristen? Is that, okay. Then we're going to go to, who is next? Oh, well, we're back to Kate, who did thumbs up as well. And then we have Alex, who also did thumbs up. But it's a nice backdrop. This is where the speaker's podium was, so you get an idea. And then you see the banners. These banners will be back out for graduation. Our student Jane, a big Eagles fan. She's quite happy because the Eagles played and won on Thursday. Luke, also thumbs up. Then we have a couple of different ones right here. I think, yes, this is, Abby decided to do a different pose that I tried to imitate. And then Jamil, who was not in the other picture, did show up for this. And he did a thing with his hands that I couldn't imitate very well, but I tried. Anyhow, those are pictures that I had students, I sent them to students. They were supposed to send those home. If you have not gotten those pictures or one of those or whatever and would like one, just email me, cmyers@gettysburg.edu, and I'd be glad to send you a picture. But that's fun to have, and then to remind students at graduation, here's what you looked like in your first few days on campus. This is what you looked like and the like, and just remember what you were thinking about, because these 4 years go so quickly. They go so quickly, and the changes are so remarkable over the 4-year period. So this is a nice sort of baseline for students that I think. Anyhow, let's look. We were asked the question about textbooks. So one of the things that I do, there are just scads and scads of textbooks that you could use in a course on death and the meaning of life. What I'm interested in doing is looking at death from a variety of perspectives, but in ways that are really age appropriate for my students. So a lot of the material deals with death as it relates to late teens or people that would be of college age, as opposed to books that might be more appropriate for some that are older. But I always read Elie Wiesel's Night, because one of the things that we begin the course with is talking about death on a grand scale. We talk about genocide. We talk about terrorism and the like, 9/11, and sort of death that is just so incomprehensible. Just getting your mind around the numbers is just so difficult to do. And then we're going to narrow that down. We're going to continue to narrow until we get to death of individuals. But we begin with Elie Wiesel's Night. And then we go on, in normal years, we would go to the Holocaust Museum, and Wiesel was very important in the design and the execution and the fundraising and the like for the Holocaust Museum in DC. We next read 13 Reasons Why, which is a very, very a powerful book about teen suicide. It's been made into a movie series, and most of my students have seen the movie and have not read the book. So reading the book gives them a different perspective, I think, on it. but that's an important topic. Teen suicide, we deal with teen suicide. We next read The Fault in Our Stars, which is about the death of two young people. It's really more about the death of one young person and the impact that death has on a loved on, well, on others. And so what we do is look at death by disease. They're both suffering from cancer. The boy and girl in it are suffering from cancer. So death by disease and the implications of all of that. We then read a book called When Bad Things Happen to Good People. This is a classic. It's a relatively well-known book. It sold millions and millions of copies. It was first published in the late 80s, I believe. It's by a rabbi, Harold Kushner, who deals with, or who for whom the issue is raised because his son dies of progeria. Progeria is a disease where you die of old age when you are 12. And he cannot figure out why a good God would allow his good son to die like that. A horrible death and an unfair death, a rare, rare disease. And Harold Kushner's done nothing but try and do God's will in his life. And so it raises, I've tried to be good. Why do bad things happen? Well, it's not why do, it's when bad things happen to good people, because we don't know why bad things happen. It's what do we do when bad things do happen. And that's a provocative sort of philosophical, theological reflection on death that I think is important for students to wrestle with. It uses the book of Job, if you're familiar with that in the Bible. That's an important part of the writing. We then go to a poet, funeral director called The Undertaking, Thomas Lynch, who writes poetically about the funeral industry, which is, he's very, very, very good. And it gets you to think about why we do what we do in terms of funerary rites, what's the importance of some of the things we do. And it's really quite a thoughtful treatment from someone who deals with death all the time and has lived in a family that has dealt with death for a long time. He is a funeral director of a home that his father started. That brings us to Stiff, which is a little bit different. It is the curious lives of human cadavers. We talk about body donation, and we wonder what actually happens if you donate your body. Well, this book tells you about a lot of the different things that cadavers are used for, everything from training physicians and surgeons. They're used as crash dummies. They are used in all kinds of different ways, in addition to being used by anatomy classes in medical schools. And then finally, we read Proof of Heaven, which gets at the issue of continuity of life, about Eben Alexander, who is a physician himself, who has a near-death experience. And what's interesting to me about this is that he is a highly, highly trained scientist, and his entire worldview is scientific. And yet he has an experience that he cannot explain scientifically. And it just sort of blows his mind that, in fact, there may be more than what we can, in fact, explain scientifically. So that gets us at the issue of continuity of life, which we deal with a little bit later in the semester. And in addition to doing that, we do field trips in normal years. We do field trips to DC. We do a Gettysburg College battlefield tour. We visit a local funeral home. We go to the local hospital. And we have a Ghosts of Gettysburg College walk with Mark Nesbitt, who's going to do something similar to that tonight. If you're interested, at 7 o'clock, there is a program that Mark is going to run through the parent association. He's doing that tour for anyone that's interested in showing up, and I would recommend that. But we can't travel, and the problem is that, for instance, the Holocaust Museum has been closed. It opens on Monday. But the problem is transportation. We need to take transportation, and you are, for 3 hours, you're in a relatively small area, and that's a problem right now. We don't want to risk that. The battlefield tour, some people have been able to do the battlefield tour, a type of battlefield tour. Again, the kind that I'm interested in, you're together too much. And I'll show you some of the pictures where that is the case. And that doesn't work if you're going to be socially distanced. We can't get into a hospital, although we have visited the maternity ward in the past. And we can't go to a funeral home either this semester. So we're going to have to do Zoom with people who are a funeral director and with a physician. So those are field trips that I would normally do. This is just a different situation. But we have a lot of guest speakers that come to class. So I've got the person that does our battlefield tour is a retired lieutenant colonel in the Army who does tours for the Army War College, which is in Carlisle, just up the road from us. A pathologist, Charlotte Kim, who is a fellow at Harvard's Children's at Harvard's Boston Children's Hospital right now. She spoke to us about autopsies and what autopsies are about, how they're performed and why they're done and the like. We have a pediatrician, David Nelson, who's a graduate of the college, who will Zoom with us and talk about death in children. What's it like for families to lose a child, one that's stillborn, for instance, or one that dies in early infancy, sudden death syndrome, those kinds of issues. We had a hospice worker talk to us about the organization of hospice. And one of the students asked about it, if her work with hospice changed her view about death. And she revealed at the time, actually, Patty's a good friend of mine, and I knew this, but I didn't know whether she would say anything about it. 2 years ago, she lost a son to a sudden death, a pool accident. He did a flip in a pool to get into the pool and hit his head on the side of the pool. And he was doing it evidently alone, and they found him dead in the pool. And her reaction was, hospice, even though hospice is difficult, hospice gives you the chance to say goodbye. And that's the one thing she didn't have the chance to do with her son, who died this tragic accidental death. And so it put into perspective the importance of hospice, that can be a real gift to be able to say goodbye to someone, as opposed to being someone just losing someone without ever having the chance to sort of tie things up and to have any kind of real closure. I thought that was very, very profound. We talked to a funeral director. I'll show you some pictures of the funeral home in just a moment. We had one of our psychologists on campus came and spoke to us about suicide and about stages of grief. She deals with college suicide in colleges, and she deals a lot with students who are experiencing grief because of the loss of a loved one. So she was helpful, I thought, there. We have a medium that has come to class for the last couple of years. I'm still trying to negotiate whether she can come this year or not. But that's always really an interesting class as we contact spirits and have them come to class. And then Mark Nesbitt, we have this authority on ghosts who does the tour for us and then plays EVP, these things where you put a tape recorder in a dark room where you think there is ghost activity, and it's a voice activated recorder. So you ask a question and then you pause, and then in a time you end up seeing the recorder recording. And you go back and you listen to it, and you actually can hear noise on the tape that was picked up by the tape but can't be heard by the human ear. So it's really freaky. That really freaks students out. Then we also have some religion professors. My colleague teaches, Stephen Stearns, our Judaic Studies professor, and David Walsh teaches Native American and Native American religions, and we have them come talk about death in those religious traditions. The assignments that we do, we do a lot of the books that we read. People are going to write papers on them, response papers. They also have to interview someone that deals with death regularly. So they may have talked with you, for those of you that have a student in the class right now, they may have talked to you about that assignment. They need to have an interview and write up an interview with a physician or a clergy person or someone in the medical field or an EMT or something like that, someone that deals with death regularly. They need a conversation with that person, and they will write that up and present that to the class. They're also going to do a research project. So we're in the midst of sort of working on research papers. And then the final exam, which you've probably heard about, they are going to write their own obituary, their own funeral plans, and their epitaph. I haven't decided whether to do it this year, but in years past, on a day late in the semester, and Jamel, I need you to close your ears here. You're not supposed to hear this, but we pull death dates out of a hat, and you write your obituary in light of that being your death date. When I don't do that, everyone lives to be 115. And so that, to sort of get some variation, just pulling a name out of a hat. And everyone that lives to be 115 is really generous by saying, well, I'd be glad to donate my organs to anyone that would like them. And I always have to write back and say, I don't think anyone wants your 115-year-old organs, but that's really generous of you to offer. So choosing a name, a date out of the hat at least gives you an idea. Okay, if this is the time I have, what would I like to be known for? And then am I doing things that are going to get me there? That's ultimately what this is about. How do you want that little write-up in the paper to read? What do you want to have done? Do you want to be married? Do you want to have children? Do you want to have a career? Do you want to be involved in service? Do you want to be involved in a faith community? And then what do you want done with your body? Give people instructions what you would like. And they will have visited the funeral home at this point. They know sort of about caskets. They know about embalming. They know about cremation. They can make more informed decisions about the actual plans that they want and what kind of service they would like to have. And then I like an epitaph, which we don't do really anymore, but something that just sort of states, this is what I want to be, how I want to be known in life. They used to do that all the time on tombstones and headstones that are really clever. If you walk through some old cemeteries, you can see those. So I just want people, if you had to sum up your life in a few words, how would you like your life to be summed up? And that is an incredibly challenging assignment for students. What I never reveal to students, and again, Jamil, you need to close your ears. What I never reveal to students is it's absolutely impossible to grade those. I mean, how do I grade someone's death? I mean, seriously. So I end up doing how detailed you are and things like that. But it's very, very enlightening what students come up with. And that's the kind of thing that can be the basis for a conversation with the family. Well, here's what I think we need to do, or I think I'd like to do. And then someone else says, no, this is what I've been thinking. So this actually can be the basis of a conversation, not an easy conversation, but an important conversation around the dinner table at some point in the future. Well, with that in mind, I'm just going to do some quick things here. I'm going to go run through this fast, just give you some pictures. These are pictures of years past because we have not done as much traveling as we would, and we can't do one of the things called the challenge course. I like to give my students a near-death experience at the beginning of the semester so they know what death is about. They've looked death in the eye. So I take them to our challenge course, and we have people that run this challenge course, which is called a high ropes course. And it's out on our campus beyond the quarry area, out beyond where our what's our natatorium and all of that happen to be. But it's this high ropes course, and I'll just show you sort of, we gather at the bottom, we do some icebreakers and the like, and then we do some things up on walking across a beam that is a telephone pole that is about 40 feet off the ground. And we put people on each end and have them cross in the middle. So here are two students encountering one another and having to try and get around each other on a beam 40 feet above. And you can see how high that beam is, and they ended up doing it, and then they get lowered back down to the ground. But you can see you've got to climb up to this beam, and then you walk across that beam. I thought that was pretty scary. Well, here's another scary thing that you do. Here, another one that students do. Here is a student getting ready to jump off of a little pedestal that's probably 50 feet off the ground, and she's going to try and bat that volleyball or tetherball, whatever it is. She's going to fly off of that thing and hit the tetherball and then be lowered to the ground. And I got a great picture of a student actually doing that from that angle. That's a different student than the one that's up here. But here's another student that's actually able to reach out and hit that tetherball and then is lowered down. And what we've done the last couple of years, and I should say, this is the one that we normally walk across. And so I thought that was scary enough. And I've done that a number of times myself. But the last couple of years, we've done the one that's even higher. This is 60 feet off the ground. And this is these, I don't know if you can see these little pads. You walk across those pads 60 feet off the ground. And I'll show you how you do this. This is really, you climb up and then you walk across those pads with people holding those pads on the ground. They try and steady the pads as you hop from pad to pad. You talk about something incredible. Okay, here's a student that's going to do it. So I'll show you how you do this. Here, the group below that's going to make sure she doesn't fall, but she's going to climb up. And look how high this thing is, okay? She is now probably 60 feet off the ground. And she's going to get on that landing here, that little platform. She's going to step out. They're going to move the pad over, and she's going to step out on that pad and grab onto the rope above the pad. And you talk about scary. Our students love this stuff. They think it's fantastic. And here she is getting between two, maybe that's, I don't think that's the same student. That's another one, but getting from one to another. And you can see all the students involved, but again, we can't do it because it all involves being close to one another. We just can't do that kind of activity. But the student ends up being able to get across, and then you get lowered again. But it really is incredible to watch students do these things, and they love this kind of outdoor activity. We tend to do this in the very first week of the semester when the weather's good and the like. That's really a bonding kind of experience. I need the group to be tight because we deal with issues where you've got to feel comfortable with others. And so this is a kind of trust exercise, but it's also a kind of way of getting to know people outside of the classroom, which is what the trips help to do as well. Okay, well, let's move to Washington, D.C. We go to the D.C. area. As I indicated in years past, we go to Arlington, we go to the King Memorial, and we go to the Holocaust Museum. We've got a great van that we do that in. So here is a group from last year on their way to the trip. Here's the inside of the van. You can tell it's really plush, but again, you can't be 6 feet apart. You're too close, and that's the reason we can't use the van to go to DC. Here I am in the back. Someone took a picture of me, I guess, in the back here schmoozing. You can see back here, I bring Dunkin' Donuts all the time. So we eat donuts and drive to DC. And then when we get to DC, we go first to Arlington. So here's a group in Arlington. When we get into Arlington, we go from Arlington to the Kennedy graves and over to the Tomb of the Unknowns, and then we go back. So very quickly, here is the group that is at Kennedy's grave site. And we have John and Jackie, their grave sites there. Then we have the group that is looking with the eternal flame here. And then we have them over at the, this is the Robert Kennedy area over here. So Robert Kennedy's grave is not too far from where Jackie and John are buried. And then we go to the Tomb of the Unknowns and we watch the changing of the guards there. And then we hot-footed out. A couple of years ago, I had a student who, on our way down to DC, said, I have a grandfather who's buried in Arlington. And I said, oh, really? And she said, yeah, I've never seen him and I don't know. My mother just told me about it. So we looked up, there is an index that you can get on the website, and we looked up his name, and it wasn't too far from the site of the changing of the guards. So we, in fact, after watching that, walked down to this grave site. We found it, and this is her first encounter with her grandfather. And it was so touching. She fell on her knees and touched the headstone. And I just happened to be there with my phone to snap a picture of it. But it was a really touching moment. But we normally don't have much time to do that. So we are running quickly from that site. We go from Arlington back to the Lincoln Memorial, if you're familiar with DC, to the Martin Luther King Memorial. And then from there, we go to the Holocaust Museum, and then we leave. Well, after we go to Arlington, we have to have lunch, and all of our students love servo. You've probably heard about servo, so they pack lunches for us. And I always point out when we go to the King Memorial, because it's one of the newest ones on the in DC, I point out that it's really important where it's located. King gave his I Have a Dream speech on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial over here in August of 1963. And if you draw a straight line from where he was standing when he gave that speech to the Jefferson Memorial, all men are created equal, it goes right through where the King Memorial was placed. And the King Memorial is really quite impressive. And every time students stand in front of it, they always want a picture of them posing like King, standing in front of the memorial. So here is a group that is posing like King. On the side of it, it is based on a quote that he gives in his I Have a Dream speech. And the quote is, "Out of the mountain of despair, a stone of hope." And this, in fact, is the stone of hope that is cut out of a mountain of despair. So the mountain of despair is back further, and this has been pulled out. And then the picture of King, the image of King, is in fact on the front of it. I'm going to move more quickly here and move us to the Holocaust Museum. Have you been to the Holocaust Museum? I've been there multiple times, and it's an incredible museum to visit. And students, particularly after having read Night, really appreciate the museum. This year, what we did was a virtual tour. We were able to get glasses that we could put our cell phones into, our smartphones into, and then look at sites. We actually could scan around the museum. So we did that for both the museum and the battlefield tour. But I point out in the opening, in the entry room, which is called the Hall of Witness, this picture of Auschwitz. This is the track leading into the entrance of Auschwitz. And what you see when you walk into the museum is this is the exit from the Hall of Remembrance, it's called, which is the end of the exhibit. And this was designed to look like this picture. So the stairway actually expands, even though, of course, the tracks don't. It's the perspective that makes the tracks look further apart. The stairway actually does expand in the Holocaust Museum. And the simple fact is that you entered Auschwitz on a train, but you never exited. And that's the point here is no, you now exiting. You're now coming out of. Now there is hope. You are coming out of this museum, and you cannot fail to remember what you have experienced. The museum is absolutely remarkable in driving home those points. So here is the Hall of the Hall of Witness that I was talking about just a moment ago. And these are the stairs you're looking at now from the other way, the stairs over here coming down. But then there are other things. There are pictures. There is an exhibit of 3 stories high of pictures of all of the people that were killed in a town. These are just all family photos and the like for 3 stories, and you just begin to see the number of people that were just wiped out. You see, this is Arbeit macht frei is the phrase that is over the entrance to Auschwitz. Again, sort of remembering what Auschwitz is all about. Sorry, I'm getting a phone call. And then finally, one of the displays that always messes me up is the shoe display. These are just all shoes that have been discarded, that have been kept for years and years and years, and just show all of the individuals that ended up dying. It's a very, very powerful part of the exhibit. Wiesel's quote is emphasized there. Niemöller's quote, students go to the Hall of Remembrance at the end, and that's what they then exit and come down the staircase. But they also even have an exhibit for children. It's called Daniel's story. And I did walk through this exhibit last year, and I found two people. I didn't even pay attention. As it turns out, these are two of my students that are sitting in the display. They looked like mannequins, but they were listening to the radio that was playing. And it's a really powerful way of explaining to children what happened in the Holocaust. So you can even take children to the Holocaust Museum and their age-appropriate ways of talking about the Holocaust with them. Another tragedy, though, in talking about death closer to home, we deal with a student that was murdered on campus in 2009. The name is Emily Rachel Silverstein. And there's a memorial to her on campus. And so we read about that death. A student of ours who is a friend of the murderer wrote about it, and students read a portion of that book and then go and visit that memorial, which most students on campus don't even know about. They walk past the memorial every single day of their lives and have no idea what it's about. So I talk about murder on campus. Death in Gettysburg there's been a lot of death in the town of Gettysburg, and there's been death on our campus as well. And students need to know about that, I think. So we talk about death through murder. We then talk about death on the battlefield. The Gettysburg College is day one of the battlefield. So we, in fact, of the Battle of Gettysburg. So we take a tour when we're able to. We did this actually virtually again, but we did go through this is the National Cemetery, which predates Arlington. This is older than Arlington is. So they go to they go to the National Cemetery. We go to a Little Round Top, and we go to where 20th Maine is responsible for the victory on day 2. One of our students last year was from Maine, so I had a picture of her next to the monument. Then we are on Little Round Top. It was a miserable day when we were there, but Round Top is a very important part of the battle. Day 2 battle, and then we walk across. After that, we walk across, and for day 3 we walk across the field that is Pickett's Charge. We go to the funeral home, the local funeral home, on another trip. The Monahan Funeral Home has been very good about allowing us in. They take us on occasion. There is the class last year in the front of the funeral home. They take us through the casket selection room. We learn about the differences in caskets, what the prices are of caskets and embalming and all of that, so that you can you're an informed consumer when you go about buying a casket. We talk about vaults that caskets go in. Those are the concrete containers that caskets end up being buried in many cemeteries. We also go to, on occasion, this is not every year, but we have in the past gone into the embalming room and see what really takes place in embalming. The funeral director always tells us about it, but we don't always get to go in because there are often bodies in there being embalmed. In this case, in this year, there was not. So here is the embalming room, which is where the embalmings take place. And then we finally visit the Gettysburg Hospital, and here is Mark Nesbitt, who is speaking to the group before our tour. And so with that, that gives you an idea of some of the things that we do and where we end up going. We've had to alter the schedule some. We've had to rely more on Zoom. The difference this year is no one has an excuse for not coming to class. Because we are 100 feet from the residence hall, you can't claim that you couldn't get there. But even if you're sick or you're quarantined or whatever, everything is Zoomed as well. So we have people who are always here participating by means of Zoom. So we have the Zoom class and the in-class group. And it really is, I'm so concerned about students bonding and being sure that they are feeling comfortable with one another. And I just will tell you a quick story. I broke the class up several weeks ago when we needed to talk about one of the writings. They had written on a book, and I think it was the 13 Reasons Why book. And I was going to send them to different, it was a beautiful day. I was going to send them to different parts of campus to talk in small groups. And then I was going to go out on campus and walk around and sort of pop in on each of the groups. Well, gave them a few minutes, and I end up walking out, and they're all in one group. I couldn't get them to break up into a small group. The whole group ended up together out on the campus. And I thought that was just sort of indicative. It's a group that moves as one, it moves together. And that's really an important part of the course, feeling that sense of belonging and feeling that you're wrestling with some really important issues and you're doing it in a safe context. You're doing it with others that aren't going to judge you. You're doing it with others that are wrestling with similar issues. Okay, I'm sorry. I've talked way too long and I don't have as much time, I guess, for questions. I'm willing to stay around as long as you want, but I recognize that you may have other commitments and you don't need to stay around. But if you want to talk, ask questions, and I'll be glad to answer whatever questions that you have about the course, about college life, about being a parent of a college student. You are in for a real treat as a parent. I will just tell you, you are going to witness an absolutely remarkable change in your son or daughter. And that's what's so much fun about my job. I actually can't believe I get paid for doing what I do. I have to pinch myself oftentimes because it's so much fun being around your sons and daughters at this critical point in their lives. They're developing so much so quickly, and in 4 years they come out such different people, so much more aware of the world, so much more competent in their ability to face the world, to face challenges and the like. And before you know it, you're going to be consulting with them. You're going to be going to them for their perspective on things. And that's just so much fun to see that change where all of a sudden you become more peers than sort of a father-daughter or mother-son kind of relationship. That's a blast to see, and that will develop over time. Just sit back and watch the development take place. Okay, I'm open for questions if people have questions. If you need to go, though, please. I'm not going to be offended if you end up leaving, but I'm more than willing to talk. As you can tell, this is my life, and so I'm more than willing to share it with you.
Yeah, I have a question, Professor Myers. Thank you. Number one, this has been really interesting. But do you see any common themes in how the students sort of begin your course thinking about death and then how they end up thinking about it later?
Common themes. Well, I think the very fact that they're thinking about it is really important because I don't think students have not had organized thinking about death. I think they come having sort of thought about it on occasion or whatever, or else I don't know. But I think that it's a more organized kind of perspective. And they realize, for instance, that by the end of the class, you realize that funerals are for the living and not for the dead. You realize that death is never personal. It always affects a lot of people. There's always a ripple effect that any death has. And I think just coming away with that kind of awareness, I think is really, really powerful for students. Others have to learn that the hard way. But for students to know that really going in, I think is powerful. Knowing that grief can be all consuming and that when someone dies in your life, the world ends, but it only ends for you. Everyone else continues. And that's really disquieting to think, well, why aren't you stopped in your tracks? How can you go on with life as usual? not life isn't. So just knowing that, I think beforehand, alert students to some of the things that they will experience and explain to them why they feel the way they do. With grief, you've got mixed emotions. You feel anger sometimes, you feel sorrow, you feel listlessness. There are all kinds of different emotions, and you think you're beyond grief, and then something happens and it all comes flooding back. And you don't get, grief is not something you get over quickly and get over completely. You always have a sense of grief. You live with a sense of grief. But grief, as I tell students, grief is a sign of love. If you don't want to grieve, then simply don't love anyone. Because at some point when you love, you will end up having to say goodbye. And there is always going to be grief in love relationships. So as I say, if you don't want to grieve, then simply don't love. But the problem is we do love. And the result of that is that we're going to grieve. Knowing that, I think, is powerful for students. That's really important for them to know, and that allows them then to help others in the future. Not only others, not only themselves, but then other family members, friends, and the like. Be more sympathetic. We're learning about how to shut up when you go to visit someone at a funeral. Instead of trying to explain to them what the death means, shut up. Don't say anything. Just be there. Those are important lessons. So that Mark, I guess, is what I would hope that they would be aware of at the end of the semester. And I really do think they are, from the things that they write and the things that they say later in the semester. I think they're far more aware of that. Good question, though. Very good question.
Hi, and my son's not in your class. I wish he was.
Yeah. Hello. Is he in another seminar?
He is, but I did a lot of graduate work on Elie Wiesel and read all of his books, like The Trial of God, which was really good.
Right.
I'm just curious about, what do you think it is about the American culture? Do we know why do we not talk about death? What is it about our culture that, or why are
we don't come to any kind of conclusion about that. We basically have given up our responsibility of thinking about death. We've given that up to artists. So how they grieve by writing songs and by creating picture movies or films and things like that, or painting. That's how they express their grief. So they understand the need to express grief. And when, by us not talking about it, we don't ever fully appreciate the extent of grief, and then we don't get over grief in the same way that other cultures, I think, do. Speaking about grief, and when we had this conversation the other day in class, I asked a question, I guess, for this, The Fault in Our Stars, that was about how people were uncomfortable being around these teens that were dying of cancer. And basically, it's really uncomfortable. You don't want to talk to people about their own death or about the death of someone that's close to them. You don't want them to start crying. You don't know what to do so you don't say anything. And that makes people who already feel like a leper feel even more ostracized. The dying and those who experienced death want to be treated as though they're living. They're not dead yet. So that's what we learn in hospice. You treat the dying as living people. They are still living. Don't bury them yet. Don't treat them that way. Treat them as though they're living sentient beings. And I think that's an important part of the grieving process, that you have to recognize that you can talk about someone who has died, and you may have tears initially, but the more that you get a chance to talk about the loved one, the better that is. Remembering the good times, that's important. Celebrating those moments of humor, remembering someone who's died, remembering the funniest moments you can with that person is really healing. That's a really helpful kind of thing, and being able to talk to someone else about that. I remember when such and such did this thing. I was in stitches. It just cracked me up. Those are the kinds of things that help you deal with grief, remembering those positive times. And when we are afraid to talk about death, then that doesn't get remembered. And when that doesn't get remembered, then that doesn't help heal. So we are doing an injustice to ourselves by not talking about death. Why we don't, we're just uncomfortable, and that's the reason. We're simply, it makes us uncomfortable, and we're afraid we don't have the answers. And the simple fact is, you don't have to have the answers.
Right. Of the books, which ones do they, I mean, the books that you have are amazing. I've read several of them. Are there any that really resonate with the students that they enjoy the most, or?
Well, I probably ought to ask Jamil, although he's not read all of the books yet. I think that they were probably most taken with The Fault in Our Stars. And that's, there's schmaltzy love story and all of that they, I think, sort of enjoy. And so that may be more of why that's what they wrote on the most. I gave them an option of writing on 13 Reasons Why or The Fault in Our Stars. They could choose one or the other, and I got 4 that wrote on 13 Reasons Why and 12 that wrote on The Fault in Our Stars. So they enjoyed that, I think, a little bit more. But they're all really good reads. And even if they've read, a lot of them have read Night, for instance. But reading Night later in life it's really, really, really an astounding work. I've read it dozens of times, and every time I read it, I'm just absolutely blown away by the book. We have a faculty member that is working on, that was originally written in Yiddish.
Okay.
And there is a longer version of it in Yiddish. The part that then got written in French and then got translated into English is a shortened version. And she's working on the Yiddish version and is hoping to translate and to publish that as something in the future. And it's a little more elaborative than the French and English version is. It's so stark in its description in the English and French. It's really quite, it's quite challenging, I think, in that regard. It's just too stark. Anyhow, that's another good question. And they're just, every year I just wrestle with what should we read. I've read all kinds of things down through the years. I used to read The Lovely Bones, and I got tired of reading papers on The Lovely Bones, so we don't read that anymore. And I've read another one that they hated. I kept, why can't I think of that off the top of my head? But another one that I thought was good for medical perspective on death.
Well,
And
there's a new book, When Breath Becomes Air.
yeah, that's another one. Yeah,
That
yeah.
you might like that.
Yeah, they're just all kinds of things that you can choose, and so it's a question then of finding things that I think are more appropriate for them, and that's what I would probably enjoy would be not probably something that they would necessarily pick up on, and I think that's true of the undertaking. That's more probably for a more mature reader than first-year college students, but it's a really, really well written and really thoughtful treatment of the funerary industry, and fascinating. Other questions or comments, or I don't know how many do we have? We don't have too many around. Jamil, do you want to chime in here? You're still around. You want to give a student's perspective on anything?
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Hello. I guess I think Dr. Myers kind of like really got everything about correct. In general, I mean, he really described everything so well. I think that, oh geez, what happened? I think that the only thing I would kind of want to add would be that like this class is very like, Dr. Myers has done a really good job of making us feel comfortable enough to open up and speak about these things, because obviously death is such a very specific topic, and it's something that, everyone is afraid of, whether or not they want to admit it or not. And somehow Dr. Myers has created this space, even though we are socially distant, this space where we all feel comfortable enough to open up about our lives and open up about our our concerns and our experiences that otherwise we probably wouldn't want to be as open about. And yeah, in general, I think that this is probably like obviously I don't know because I only have his seminar, but I think that this is probably one of the best seminars for to be introduced to for college, because it's so good at making you feel open right off the gate. Even during the summer when we had our Zoom calls just to introduce each other, it was it's very comforting. So yeah, I guess that's all I would really add.
Good, thank you, Jamil. And that was one of the things we tried to do. We had some Zoom calls over the summer to introduce people because we weren't going to have these we knew we weren't going to have the standard orientation activities and things like that. I like to have an ice cream social the night before the semester begins and just sort of get together and start to get to know one another. And we couldn't do that. So doing these Zoom meetings over the summer was a way for us to introduce ourselves to one another. And that was a lot of fun. We did some fun things over the summer that were that helped set the stage for the rest of the semester.
Yeah, I think we're good to go. I know there's some other family weekend topics for folks.
Activities for things to do. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, boy, I appreciate everyone's participation in this. It's, boy, I've been a blast out of the past with Jenny showing up. And Jamil, I appreciate your chiming in here. So we've got present and past students. We've got alums and parents of students in the class and parents outside of the class. It was a great combination of people. So I sure hope that you learned something from it. It's been great having a chance to talk to you about the topic. And if you have a student in the class, ask about the class and talk about the subject matter of the class with them. I think that's going to be really helpful to all people to continue with this kind of conversation. So I appreciate it. It's been great spending some time with you this morning. I would encourage you to look at some of the other offerings and show up for some of those classes as well today if you've got the time to do that. And Mark's presentation on Ghosts of Gettysburg is at 7 o'clock tonight that you can tune into.